Hey there, everybody. This is Laura from Pathless Pedaled, and this is part 2 of my getting a custom bike. If you didn't see the first part, be sure to check that out. We actually went to Breadwinner in Portland, and I sat down with Ira to talk about some of the details of how I want it to fit and ride. Since then, we've done a little bit of back and forth, and I have filled out their fit form. It's a pretty dialed fit form. And Ira, a couple days ago, sent back a BikeCad drawing. Pretty cool to see it all lined out. And now we're going to check in with him on Skype, ask a couple of questions. Well, thanks for taking some time this morning. I have a rough idea of what I'm looking at here, and I just have a couple of questions, kind of, I guess, conceptual questions. I know that you all have, I wouldn't necessarily call it like a sort of stock geometry, but you have kind of a standard idea for the G road. And so I guess I'm curious how much of the numbers on here and the angles and everything are, did you customize based off of what I sent you?
So I think I kind of break it down. I think we kind of covered a little bit of this in our consultation. The fit is the most important aspect of it. So that's really, those are the big numbers that I use to change. So things like seat tube angle, obviously seat tube length, top tube reach, which is that 566 number, which is the effective top tube. And then also a little bit of the head tube angle, but mostly the head tube length. So being able to get the handlebars up where they need to go in relationship to the saddle, because you had mentioned that your salsa, the salsa Via is what you would base the fit off of, and that's what you said you feel most comfortable on, and it's a little bit more upright than like the old fit dimensions that you had, the old fitting. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to kind of use that as a starting point. Mm-hmm. So as far as kind of how our system works is it works efficiently for us to come up with templates for various sizes, and we often use those as a starting point. So I pulled up a bike that is in that medium to slightly larger size, and then and once I pull it up, it's really easy to change all of the angles. There are certain aspects of the geometry on the bike that are kind of optimize it for how you're going to be using it. So chainstay length and bottom bracket drop, and like the bottom bracket height or bottom bracket drop are kind of ideal for 650B wheels, bigger tires, fenders, basically kind of how the bike is going to be ridden.
Right.
And then this kind of similar thing with the fork. We found that a 50 millimeter fork rake works really good. It kind of translates, it ends up with a trail that is effective for like the typical riding, like weight up front. In your case, you want to use a bag and a basket. So kind of optimizing for those trends. So in general, I feel like after 100 plus years of bike geometry, it's like a road bike a really good handling road bike has certain specific details about it that make it work well. And then same thing for mountain bikes and gravel bikes, 650B, different wheel sizes. So there's a lot to kind of throw into the mix.
Yeah.
But essentially the geometry that I changed on your bike is essentially starting with the fit, mm-hmm. and then figuring out how you want to use the bike and what you're going to be carrying, what gear you want to have on it,
right.
And making it all work around that.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. So I guess also you kind of touched on that, but given that I plan on installing a basket and having that up there always, how much did that impact the way that you customize some of it, or is that pretty much always, you guys assume that somebody's always going to have a front load on there?
Sometimes. I mean, our bikes are so versatile, and that's one of the things we like about the G Road and the B Road specifically, is they can fit such a broad range for how people are going to be riding, and also they fit a broad range of how people have ridden in the past. So mm-hmm. It's like somebody that's has a lot more road history is going to be looking for something that might be a little bit more sporty and responsive. Mm-hmm. And by being able to customize the geometry to optimize it, the geometry and the fit, I kind of distinguish between the two. So, but by being able to change both of those things, we can really optimize it for how the person's going to use it. So we have a lot of people who want to you get a G Road for commuting, and that's going to be a little bit different than somebody that's going to be using it for, more trail use or bike packing.
You kind of mentioned tubing in there, and that was I guess, one of the questions that Russ had is sort of recognizing that, um, you know, this isn't intended to be, an expedition touring style of bike, but it should, be sturdy enough to have that basket on the front. How does that
Yeah.
impact your choosing of tubing? And
We, again, this is kind of like finding the balance between making an efficient process and finding working with materials that are going to work for the, you know, the the broadest range of application. So on the G Road, we use throughout the whole thing, we use Columbus tubing, and then the front triangle. So the head tube or the top tube, down tube, and seat tube is all Columbus Life, which is the same tube set that we use on our cross race bikes. So it's very light. It's a little thinner, but we feel like it has the right ride characteristics to kind of keep it lively. And it does, I'm sure that there's some translation to how it rides as far as the supple factor. That's definitely part of it. We didn't want the bike to be too stiff because that's just too jarring. And for a bike in your range with like a 56 centimeter top tube, effective top tube, anything in that range, we feel that the Columbus Life is like the best choice. And then on the rear end, the seat stays and chain stays, we use Columbus Zona, which is a little bit thicker. It has the right bends to it, so it's the S-bend stays, and we manipulate those a little bit more. We dimple the chain stays to get a little bit more tire clearance, but we feel like that's a good stiff rear end, but without being too much. It's really like finding the balance between having it be light and agile, like light riding, but also making it durable. Obviously, we don't want to put all of this energy into making something that's only going to last a couple of years.
Right.
So, we really feel that this is like the best combination of both. And also the smaller head tube, the 36 millimeter head tube, which is a little bit smaller than what you see on a lot of bikes nowadays. That's really the beauty of steel is there's enough rigidity there with a standard 1.125" steer tube and a standard dimension fork that we don't feel like you need that extra size to the head tube.
Right.
It just works out really well. And then the Eigelhart fork adds a nice balance to it. It is a little bit heavier than a carbon fork, but it has the great ride characteristics, and obviously it checks off all the boxes as far as being able to have that versatility in the carrying racks and bags and kind of whatever you want up the front.
So is there anything else on in this the CAD drawing that you sent over that you feel like you want to point out or that I should be asking you a question about?
No, I mean, I don't know. I look at these things every day, so
Right,
it's hard
right.
for me I guess the big thing, again, how our design philosophy works is I always distinguish between geometry and fit. Geometry is kind of like what makes the bike do what it does, but the fit has a lot more. It's a more holistic, broad perspective as far as the fit involves the saddle, the seat post, the stem, the handlebars, crank arm length, all sorts of things like that.
Right.
So that's why I want to look at what you've written in the past and your fitting information, and then I plug that into the design program, and I essentially design the bike within those parameters. So that's why it's really nice to be able to kind of like put the saddle where it needs to go and put the handlebars where it needs to go, and then kind of designing and massaging the design within those parameters. So it works well to kind of give it an aesthetic balance that I don't think you see in a lot of production bikes.
Right.
So the bars are higher than the saddle. By from the top of the saddle to the top of the bars is 38 millimeters, But there's also, you can see that the head tube, there's 30 millimeters of head tube spacer or spacer stack above the headset.
Right.
That allows for some adjustability. Some customers are some customers aren't super bike nerds. So they're like, yeah, it looks great. I'm trusting your judgment, which is great. And then other people want to like know really specific details.
Right.
And one of the benefits of using this design program is which is called BikeCad, we can generate any information that somebody might want. So we can do stack and reach and trail and all sorts of information. So this is, we really cater to each specific customer's needs or what they're used to as far as technology or geometry. So yeah, I feel like this is a really solid design for you, and I can give you as much or as little information as you need. So I never want it to be overwhelming.
Yeah.
I like,
I will admit that this is a little bit Greek to me, but as I'm trying to get a better grasp of some of these dimensions just in general and how they impact ride and stuff. So it is really interesting for me to start looking at some of these numbers and then obviously to share it with Russ, and he has a much better understanding of what some of these, how they translate into actual ride feel. So so this is great. I think the next step here is I give you permission to start cutting tubing, right? And then what comes after that? When do we get to start bickering over components and things like that?
I hope it's not bickering, but yeah, we have materials on the way, just based on the rough design. So we have those on the way. So we should start production next week.
Cool.
And how our production process works is we have mitering Monday, tacking Tuesday, welding Wednesday.
Nice.
Seats day Thursday, which we put a little lisp on it and say feet day Thursday.
Thursday, yeah.
And then finishing Friday.
Awesome.
So we try to keep on track for that process. Yeah. So mitering Monday, we lay out all of the tubing. Basically, just start cutting all of the specs. And then that's also when we do some of the early brazons, like internal routing, things like that. And then Tuesday we tack everything. So we put all the tubes in the fixture and then we tack them in place. And that's basically the front triangle and the chainstays with the dropouts on the rear. So we don't do seat stays right away. And then we send it, Christopher Eigelhart does all of our welding. So he's just super efficient at it. And we've been working with Chris for a really long time. So once everything is tacked and held in place, then we take it across the street. And Chris does all of the welding, which takes about half an hour per frame. Takes us about 45 minutes to weld a frame, and so we like to utilize Chris as much as possible. Nice. We get it back in the shop on Thursday, and we align it. So it's really, we just check the alignment throughout the process to make sure that everything's still on track. Really, it's like the quality and the time that it takes to do the miters and make sure the fit up is perfect takes out a lot of the guesswork later on. So there's really not a lot of alignment. We check everything to make sure it's still straight and true. And then Thursday we do the seat stays. So we do the main triangle and the chain stays on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then Thursday, we basically put the frame back in the fixture, and then we braze the seat stays in on Thursday. Nice. And we use an technique with fillet brazing using brass on the seat stays and also the dropouts and the chainstay assembly, which is a nice detail. So we get this like very nice scalloped finish to it, which requires a lot more work and time and energy, but we feel really strongly that it kind of preserves a classic appeal and a classic style to the construction, which is kind of a nice touch. Friday is finishing, so we do the seat stay and the chainstay bridges. And then we do all of the finishing brazons. So any water bottles and rack mounts and all of that last stuff happens on Friday. Cool. So and then frame comes up. Our painter comes up every Tuesday and drops off finished frames and picks up the batch from the previous week. Yeah. So so we often end up doing like the last like facing, chasing, making sure all the bearing surfaces are straight on Monday, which doesn't really fit into our program. So
cool, man.
But yeah, that's the process.
That's a pretty slick process.
Yeah, it's efficient, and it's good for us to sort of have a schedule to sort of stay on track. It keeps everything moving pretty smoothly. Do you have any other questions about it, or?
No, you said you were gonna you could take some photos and send them over throughout, or?
Yeah, yeah. Typically, how we do it, it's often hard to get photos throughout the process,
Sure.
throughout the week. But we, when I'm doing the finishing steps on Friday, it's sometimes hard for people to grasp. Like when they just see a bunch of tubes on a bench, it's like, okay, what am I looking at?
Right, right.
But on Friday, when I'm doing the last couple of finishing steps, I typically take a bunch of photos of the raw frame,
Yeah.
and it's cool to see it without paint on it, and you can kind of see the details and some of the finish work.
Yeah, it's just fun to see some of that, even just a little glimpse of behind the scenes.
Totally
would be cool. So
we got the thumbs up.
we do have a thumbs up. Yeah,
we'll start production next week, and Tony will be in touch about parts, and
great.
And I'll send you some examples of paint so we can go from there.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, talk to you
Bye-bye.
later. So that's it for this video. Hope y'all are enjoying this look at my getting a custom bike. Stay tuned for part 3. And as always, keep the supple side down.